The president of Korea stood before his countrymen, warmly greeting them before asking for their attention as he was about to speak. He kept reminding everyone to make sure their families were sitting together and watching TV. People shouted to friends to flip on their TVs, spreading the word until the president urged everyone to tune in so as many citizens as possible could see the broadcast. The president kept speaking, saying he'd just heard that more people were watching his speech than expected, even before a single minute had gone by, and he thanked everyone for understanding his strange orders during such a confusing time. He then announced that martial law had begun at 5 p.m. on July 16th, explaining that the military had taken over the news and important places while shutting down the main roads. He traveled so far because he wanted to face the apocalypse in an orderly way, and by now everyone knew that the game called Survival Life had finally become real life. He then mentioned the asteroid from the game Unjambi, which was flying straight for Earth, and by the morning news, the U.S. military had failed to shoot it down. Because of this, the asteroid finally crashed down right near Okinawa. The blast tore the land apart, and it turned out the destruction was terrible because the sad truth was that people in Japan were now turning into zombies. He warned that the zombie spores drifting from Unjambi were racing toward their country and would arrive at 1 o'clock today. Standing before the nation once more, he confessed the zombie outbreak was unstoppable, yet his team found that a few special people, including the awakened, could somehow stay safe, so he had built hidden time shelters at marked spots for them to go to, but they wouldn't open for a whole year to keep everyone secure. He then mentioned there was even a guide to the early monsters, all ready to be dropped from planes and leaflets. After that, he declared that all the thermal power plants would soon be closed, and then he admitted his many mistakes, but insisted he had done what was necessary in this final moment. The president finished his speech, saying it was an honor to serve everyone, then bowed and told us to keep going and promised to meet again. He whispered a final thanks to the anonymous tipster who told them exactly when the disaster would happen, and then the broadcast faded out, leaving the screen dark and quiet. Far away, a man held his remote control and sighed, knowing that while he had prayed the end of the world might be avoided, it had now arrived, so he was ready to survive it just like he had before. He picked up his weapon, moved forward with a calm smile, and became our hero. A few months before the world ended, a game called Survival Life was released that was hard to beat. It was a virtual reality apocalypse game called Sura. The game was so insanely hard that even the toughest Korean players felt completely beaten. Because of that, the game shot straight to the top of the charts right after it came out. Even though the game started with a lot of buzz, only 4 players were left a year later. The game soared in fame just to crash down again. But the game was so tough that everyone else quit until he was the last one left in Sura. He wished for new friends to join his game, yet he couldn't bring himself to leave, and as the old players slowly stopped coming online, he was eventually left all alone. Even though things were tough, he kept making update videos so he could still play with them, streaming day and night, just waiting for them to come back. A few months flew by, and the game got easier with better early levels. As the game grew, strange new foes like zombies, fantasy monsters, and even hideous mutated creatures started to emerge. He cheered for the big update at first, but his friends soon grew bored and stopped logging in entirely. In the end, the game Sura was down to just 1 player, and finally, on that fateful day, he grew so fed up that he decided to quit for good. Suddenly, a system message popped up on his screen telling him that the Survival Life team was shutting down the game forever in just 1 week. Gazing at the ruined city and the monsters surrounding him, he whispered that before leaving, he wanted to take down that one monster right alongside his friends. A deep sadness settled on him, so he stopped the recording and quietly took off his gear. After that, he shut down his streaming account and the channel where he had spent over 5,000 hours broadcasting Sura. But he couldn't bear to toss the hard drive packed with memories, so he shoved it away into the storage closet. Kim Bapta, no, Kong Sung-ho closed that chapter of his life, and from that moment on, he truly began living his real life. Just like that, 3 months went by, and Kong Ho finally found his footing. The only reason they called his ID Kimap Joa was because that's just what it was. He had been running a snack shop for 3 years. After his parents passed away when he was a high school sophomore, he inherited a house with a snack shop on the first floor. He lived on the second floor, where a framed photo of his parents hung quietly inside, while outside, customers gathered before the shop sign that read Su Hong's Tasty Snacks. Kong Su Hong walked up with a tray to say the food was ready, but someone else shouted his name loudly. A pretty local hairdresser named Mickey Wong walked up with a laugh and told him business had been great that day, even though he'd never bothered to ask for her real name. Mickey Wong stepped closer to ask if he'd seen anything cool, gave him a light tap, and showed her her phone, but Su Hong just looked puzzled and asked what she meant. Mickey Wong told him she'd heard from some kids that the topic was trending online, showing him a post on her phone that claimed a status window would appear if you shouted it, with people arguing over whether it was true or just nonsense, to which Su Hong calmly replied that he understood. Kai Wang then shared that she had tried it herself, but sadly, it didn't work for her. Hearing that, Su Hong chuckled softly and told Kong that such a thing could never really happen, then smiled and asked if she was being a bit too easily fooled. Later that day, after Seiho closed his shop and headed home, the words Merking had spoken lingered in his mind, tempting him to take a chance despite his doubts, so he raised his hand and shouted to summon his status window. But sadly, nothing changed right away. He looked away, sure it was all a joke. Just then, a strange blue light flashed in the air, and something appeared before him with a sharp sound. Sunho froze and stared in shock at a glowing screen suddenly appearing before him, shouting that he couldn't believe it had really showed up. The glowing status window floated before Su Hong, displaying his health, strength, agility, dexterity, and perception with no skills or special effects listed yet, until his eyes landed on a mysterious trait called Open Private Portal that made him feel like he had seen it before. Suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind, and he quickly checked the traits section to find a way to open a private portal, even though he found a command name a bit silly. Su Hong Ho lifted his hand and gave the order for the gate to open, as blue light curled up from his palm and started to spin. The air curled around whirling rivers of light until they joined to make a glowing ring. In the next moment, the light burst open to reveal a towering, glowing blue gate that Su Hong stared at in awe, whispering his amazement until a familiar chill told him this portal was exactly the same as the labyrinth gate from Sura. His heart began to race, and he clutched his head in disbelief, wondering if this was really the survival system. Fear and doubt froze his face as he quickly whispered that none of it could be true. Shang-Ho snatched up his phone and muttered that if this were true, Yun Jambi's name would surely be in the news, so he stared at the screen with nervous excitement. Just then, a news story popped up about an asteroid named Yun Jambi that NASA was watching, saying it was almost impossible for it to hit us, but his face turned pale as he whispered in shock that it really was here. Panic surged through him, so he shook his head over and over, trying to convince himself that holding his head and repeating the name was just a coincidence and that it was too soon to panic. As he stared at the article on his phone, doubt crept back in, and in a whisper he asked himself if it was real after all. Sango stood by the glowing portal, quietly staring at it, and saying that if this was real, there might be proof inside. He slowly peered into the swirling blue light, which danced like endless, flowing water. Su Hong stood before the glowing blue portal, hoping to find some proof inside if this was truly happening. He slowly stretched his hand toward the portal, but froze right before he could touch it. He paused, his hand shaking, and knew jumping in without a plan was too risky. So, Su Hong Ho pulled back, took a moment to think, and decided to test the way first by gently pushing a ladle inside to feel what was on the other side. After a pause, he pulled the ladle back and saw dirt on it, which made Sango relax and reason that if it were just dirt, the other side wasn't a labyrinth, but maybe just a warp that teleported him to another spot on Earth. He tossed his small bag over his shoulder, glanced once more at the glowing blue portal, and realized that after doing the bare minimum to stay safe, it was finally time to decide whether to walk through. After a moment, he stepped through and immediately gasped in shock as his eyes went wide. When he looked around, he was in a whole new world with green trees around him, fresh air, and a glowing portal behind him that made him wonder if this was all real. He checked his phone and found no signal at all, so he guessed he was deep in the middle of nowhere, far away from where anyone else would ever go. For now, he couldn't tell where he was, so he decided to find proof by exploring the area and leaving marks on trees with his pen-like tool to show his path. Then he trudged deeper into the woods, wiping sweat from his brow and grumbling about how exhausting it was while wondering why the forest felt so endless. Feeling drained and annoyed, he desperately wanted something to show up, just as he suddenly sensed a presence right behind him. Before he could do anything, a bright red beam shot out and threw him backward so hard he let out a scream. When he looked up and froze, he saw a strange white deer with weird antlers standing there, a blue window in the air named Valley Deer, and his heart sank as he realized this wasn't Earth, which scared him. But after watching it closely, he realized it didn't look like a dangerous beast. He took a deep breath and admitted that while it seemed like the end of the world, he still had no real proof, though things would look very different if dangerous monsters like stone monkeys or wild boars had shown up. From that moment on, he felt a bad feeling coming, something he had already sensed deep down. He felt this place was deeply tied to life and death. Still, he told himself nothing was certain, so he shoved that doubt aside, gripped his weapon tighter, and stepped forward into the unknown. He finally admitted the truth to himself. He was holding out hope for humanity just because he was afraid to face the disaster that was coming. Soon he found it, a strange tree glowing softly in the forest that showed its name, Sun Apple, on a blue box. He paused in silence to stare at it, then carefully reached out to pick up the glowing fruit, swallowed hard while holding it, and muttered with a worried look that it seemed okay. He took a bite of the glowing apple, feeling the strange but warm energy spread through his body. A blue window popped up, telling him the sun apple had just given his stamina a little boost. His eyes went wide with shock as he realized the change felt just like the sun apple juice you can buy in a game shop, and he muttered in disbelief. He let out a dry laugh and muttered a curse, which was proof enough that he was right. As if things weren't bad enough, he spotted something else nearby, goblin droppings, and seeing it turned his face grim because he knew things were about to get worse. He took a deep breath, rubbed his head, and finally stopped fighting the truth, letting his chest rise and fall as he calmed himself down. Slowly, he raised his head, his eyes turning cold with a grim belief that the end was finally here. Once he was sure that feeling of déjà vu was real, he stepped through the portal and got ready right away. The first thing he did was pull out an old hard drive to watch the early gameplay footage, remembering that he had only recorded it because he loved the game, and he couldn't believe it was being used for this now. After digging through the drive, he finally uncovered details about a deadly alien asteroid named Yunjong B that crashed near Okinawa on July 20th, instantly wiping out the island and turning people infected by zombie spores into decaying corpses within 5 hours. So when he checked the clock and did the math, he realized he had only 32 days left before the end of the world. He looked at it again and thought about how to stay alive, recalling how the game was filled with unfriendly and annoying rules. But the worst of it all was that deadly iron sickness. It was a strange thing that slowly turned all metal into dust, making guns, cars, and buildings useless just 5 hours after the zombie spore spread, like a deadly aftershock named Iron Death that followed close behind. A terrible wind blew through the cities and towns, smashing every metal thing and throwing humanity back to the Stone Age in a single breath. Eventually, the Iron Death would slowly fade, but just how long it took depended on where you lived. The real trouble was how long it took, with the disease lingering anywhere from 6 months to a full year before fading away, but that scary Iron Death didn't matter to him anymore. He had found a private portal and guessed that the deadly iron sickness couldn't pass through it. Once he finished his first check, he spent every last penny he'd saved to buy every single survival item he could find. He gathered weapons, food, tools, medicine, and all the gear he needed to survive on his own. After checking on the newly awakened crowd, he frowned at their reckless chatter, where some laughed off the warnings, others tried to silence the noise, and one even boasted about stealing money, making him mutter that they were far too carefree. The moment the sun rose, he stepped outside to grab more supplies. On his way home, he picked up a 60-pound hunting bow from a private seller. As he walked away, clutching the case, a sudden thought popped into his head, making him wonder if he was overreacting all by himself. He looked up at the sky and told himself that if nothing changed, it would be okay, because even if things went wrong, he could just struggle for 2 or 3 years. After wrapping up his morning chores and heading home, he quickly hung a temporarily closed sign on his shop to save time. He sighed with a heavy heart, wondering why so many changes had happened overnight just as someone called his name. A young woman stepped up to ask if he was shutting the shop, and he scratched his head with a shy smile to explain that he wasn't closing it, just updating the old place. Hearing that, she beamed and joked that he must be rich, but he just waved it off, insisting the shop was old and it wasn't such a big deal. After that, he tried to wrap things up by saying he had to take care of something and asked to be excused, but the woman suddenly called out to him again as if she wanted to ask something, only to stop herself, smile, and say it was nothing before telling him she'd see him later. She spun around and walked off, leaving him standing there in a daze, wondering what she meant, and then he quietly asked why they needed to know. He could have asked questions, but he decided to stay quiet. From that day forward, he had to take things seriously, so he stood in his room, reached out, and opened the portal. He knew his own style so well that he always planned his moves carefully to beat any challenge. Because of that, he didn't have the same physical skills as experienced players, but he knew one thing for sure. If he planned well enough, he could still survive what was coming. In Sura, you didn't grow stronger just by getting older. You only gained power by hunting and exploring. Standing before the target, he took a slow breath and wondered if his plan would actually work. He pulled the bowstring, froze when something felt different, smiled at how easy it seemed, then wiped sweat from his face and aimed again, hoping this time it might actually work. He lifted the bow high, drew the string back as far as it would go, and held his breath to aim. He let go, and the arrow soared through the air in a high curve before landing with a loud thud right on its mark. He stared at his hand in disbelief, muttering that it felt unreal while joking to himself that he must have lived a legal life in a past existence. He quietly admired the talent in his fingers, then decided that since he could only draw the bow properly about 5 times, he would start training hard today to build more strength. Once he finished getting ready, he stepped into the forest with his bow, thought hard, and realized 2 things he had to take care of from now on. His first task was to find out if he was strong enough to hunt monsters while he was so weak. Next, he had to build a secret shelter in this place to stash away his supplies. He told himself to wait for his weapons and supplies before doing anything foolish, like trying to take over a nest. As he walked through the forest, he spotted glowing fruit hanging from the branches, reached out to grab it, and laughed with pure joy at his incredible luck. After that, he kept getting ready for whatever might happen next and what lay ahead. Because of that, he stayed a veteran of Sura, scanning the area with the sure knowledge that he'd already spotted his target nearby. After a quick search, his eyes went wide because he had finally found it. He studied the goblin droppings on the ground because there was a simple reason for it. Goblins usually hung out in packs, so finding just one pile of droppings out there felt really weird. He studied the seed-only droppings and realized the goblin wasn't eating right, confirming his fear that the creature had likely been kicked out of its group. He knew he had to hunt down that goblin, no matter the cost, because chances to prove himself in a real fight were too rare to pass up. As the skies slowly turned dark with the coming of evening, he watched the light fade and felt a chill of unease creep over him. Yet the distant wolf howls told him he was nearing the valley, so he crept forward through the woods with his ears perked. Suddenly, he stopped dead in his tracks, spotting something small and green crouching near the water, and knew right away that it was a goblin. Peering closely, he saw the tiny creatures were just like the goblins he'd spotted before in Sura. He remembered that these goblins were weak monsters who usually fought with spears or poison darts. They used poison to freeze their enemies in pain and slowly twist them with endless suffering. That was exactly why he picked a bow as his first weapon. So he hid behind the trees, drew the string back, took a deep breath, and forced himself to stay calm. Peering closer, he saw the goblin was older and kicked out of its group, and most importantly, it had no poison dart or spear. He took a deep breath to calm his nerves, believing that if he stayed cool, he could catch the beast. He loosed the arrow, watching it dive straight into the goblin's arm, causing the creature to scream and thrash while he frowned just a bit before realizing his aim had missed the head, yet seeing his chance to strike again, so he decided not to hesitate. But as he stepped up for another shot, the goblin suddenly hurled a stone that smashed right into his hand, leaving him gritting his teeth in pain as he cursed under his breath. The goblin didn't run away, even with an injured arm. It charged at him with fierce bravery, proving it was a skilled fighter who stayed calm while others would have panicked. He swiftly let go of the bow and drew his sword. The goblin let out a scary roar and swung its weapon right at him. Their blows smashed together in a loud crash, with both fighters pushing hard and refusing to give an inch. Sunho threw himself forward without a second thought, clutching his blade as he swung it with sharp, focused eyes right at the goblin. The goblin twisted its body to dodge a deadly blow but was still knocked backward. Sango roared and surged ahead, slamming into the goblin with all his might, while the creature shrieked in agony and fury, refusing to crumble as their blows met in a blur of splashing blood. Sango gritted his teeth and swore at the goblin for still holding its ground. As they fought, his knife slipped right from his grip and flew away, letting the goblin grab the chance to slam into him and throw him to the ground. They crashed down together in a fierce fight, with the goblin screaming and lunging forward to bite. Just as it seemed too late, he caught his weapon and thrust it down, driving the blade deep into the goblin's body. The goblin let out one last high-pitched scream as its strength ran out. Su Hong fell to the floor, gasping for air, until a blue message popped up saying he had earned 2 points, and after staring at it for a second, he gave a weak laugh and whispered that he had finally done it. Once he calmed his heart, his gaze landed on a tiny pouch sitting just beside him. He grabbed the container, peeked inside to see guaca powder and vegetable oil, recalled that mixing them in Sora could make a simple ointment, decided to try it later, and kept moving since there was no time to relax. He knew he had to rush and dig, because if the group of goblins found the body, it would be in big trouble. He rushed away, knowing he couldn't abandon the body or risk it turning into a bone creeper, and as he moved through the forest, he spotted something strange. He halted and gazed at the stream, where 2 red trout swam peacefully in the clear water, making him frown with surprise. A new idea sparked in his head. If this valley was home to red trout, it must be something truly special, far more than he had guessed. Suddenly, a cold shiver raced down his spine as he slowly turned his stiff, terrified face toward the bad feeling in his chest that made his breath go shallow. Behind him loomed a huge owlbear monster with glowing red eyes that stared straight at him, and Su Hong swallowed hard as he realized he was completely done for. Everything he had ever done suddenly flashed before his eyes like a movie. He began to remember those days when he played the game and lived it out on stream. He often wrote down the secrets of monsters, including their habits and fighting styles, and one of his favorite subjects was the owlbear. He recalled how he once warned that the forest's deadliest threats were the werewolves and the owlbears. He explained that if an owlbear had already taken land, it was a sign that mattered. It showed that the wild beasts there lived in perfect harmony. Looking back, he realized those days were genuinely wonderful, as the chat's enthusiastic responses made him laugh, while those familiar comments kept the stream feeling lively and warm. But suddenly his thoughts snapped like a twig, leaving him wondering why he was suddenly drowning in happy memories while his face turned pale, sweat rolled down his cheek, and a strange fear pressed hard against his chest. He realized what was happening, feeling his life flash before his eyes as the owlbear stood tall, with glowing red eyes, and slowly raised its sharp claws. Su Hong, who shook his head, dismissing the idea that this was his life flashing before his eyes, and instead felt it was just a memory of his old friends telling him to calm down and get a grip. His body shook, but he forced his mind to stay clear and remember what he knew. When an owlbear goes hungry, it tears at everything in sight, so the fact that this one was just standing still meant it wasn't hungry at all. Basically, the owlbear had just one thing bothering him. This meant he had stepped into the owlbear's home, where the red trout swam. Now that he understood, his mind cleared, and he knew there was only one way out. Even though his mind was still that of Kimbab Joa, his body had already become Kangongho. But if he wanted to live, he had to do this. He gritted his teeth, screamed, and kept moving forward. With an owl's head giving it super night vision, but making it fear the sun, the monster lunged with deadly claws, yet he stayed calm because he had practiced dodging its moves until they were second nature. The giant owlbear's claw swooped toward him, and he waited for the perfect split second to act. The strike whizzed right by his nose, missing him by barely a hair's breadth. That single moment was all it took to spark his sudden surge forward. He held up his flashlight, switched it on, and aimed the bright beam straight into the eyes of the owlbear. A sudden, bright beam of light blasted out, causing the owlbear to scream in pain and roar as its eyes were blinded by the glare. The scene jumped to the next day in his room, where a loud ringing sound suddenly filled the air. The alarm kept screaming over and over, so he slowly opened his eyes, groaned, and felt his whole body ache while the noise made his head throb. He slammed the alarm clock to silence, stared at the time in confusion, and wondered if he had passed out the moment he escaped, making the long wait feel right. Lying there, he let out a tired sigh, because fighting a goblin wasn't enough. He had even run into an owlbear, a memory that made him shudder and wish he'd never see one again. Just then, his stomach let out a loud growl because he hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. He tried to stand up, lost his balance, and took a hard fall onto the floor. He groaned in pain and lay there for a moment, his legs feeling too weak to move until he finally turned his head and spotted his backpack nearby. He reached out, opened the container, grabbed a yellow apple, and bit into it without a second thought. As he chewed, a warm energy washed through him, bringing back his strength like a soft glow until he could finally lie back on the bed, breathe easy, and feel alive again. After feeling his strength return, he grinned to himself, decided it was time to eat, and headed outside to a restaurant. Just as he was ready to take a bite, he spotted someone he knew sitting right across from him. Seeing her there confused him at first, but when she smiled and explained that she just came to eat at one of her favorite spots, he finally understood why Mikyong was here. Kongho tried to explain his meaning and asked why she was sitting with him, but Mikyong cheerfully said it was nice to have someone to eat with, leaving him sitting quietly and unsure of how to react. While munching, Mikyong asked Sango if he'd ever checked out the thing she'd mentioned, and he stopped to confirm she meant the status window. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she eagerly asked if he had tried it, and in that instant, Sango finally grasped why she had held her tongue before. Kaiwang leaned in with a confident grin, insisting that the story was real and even showing him a news article on her phone about a weird thing that happened at a convenience store. While Su Hong listened, he wondered if she was just clueless or perhaps truly innocent. He smiled helplessly, showing that her question was already clear, then admitted honestly that he had tried, but found nothing. Even though he knew it was a lie, he felt lying was the only way to get through this, and it wasn't even a fighter's trick at all. It was a talent built for playing alone, not for being part of a team. In a world where survival was never certain, showing off his powers felt like handing someone a map to kill him. He tapped the table with a calm look, knowing that revealing his hand in this apocalypse was no different than inviting others to attack him. He realized Mickey must be awakened since she still asked about it, even after everything. And when she suddenly apologized to Kang Sung-ho, looking confused, he asked what she was sorry for, only for her to hesitate before admitting she had lied. While watching her, Kang-ho quietly convinced himself that Mickey Wong was truly good and seriously told her it was okay not to share everything yet. They still had time, so she would tell him later when she felt brave enough. With those words, he headed back home and found packages being delivered as he arrived. Soon, the things he had ordered started showing up one by one. Afterward, he carried the things he'd need later up to the roof, while those he needed right now were brought to the second floor. As he went about his tasks, he started getting down to serious work. He sliced open the boxes to pick out what he'd need for today's job, and once everything was spread out, his plan for the day finally made sense. Today, he needed to find a hiding spot to stay safe. He clutched the pipe hard, knowing he had to find a safe place to hide no matter what. He slung on his backpack, checked his tools, and stepped forward without a second thought. Finding a place to hide was easy for him because he had already spotted a suspicious spot while looking for the old goblin. He locked his sights on that spot, staring at the hidden cave tangled in vines, which seemed like the perfect place to hide. But he knew the most important thing was to find out what kind of monster lived there, so he raised his little telescope and carefully looked at the ground inside. Suddenly, his eyes landed on clear footprints pressed deep into the dirt. They looked familiar, and then he realized those footprints were made by Cobalt. At that very moment, he felt a rush of relief as luck stood on his side, so he lowered his telescope with a sincere smile, knowing that even though his plan would work on most weaker monsters, it was always safer to double-check everything. He picked a tiny leaf and watched it dance in the breeze before nodding to himself. Since the Cobalts slept at night, what he was about to do would be deadly poison for them. To pull off his plan, he rushed to gather firewood, pushing through the hard work without ever stopping. Once he'd gathered enough, he piled the firewood right by the cave mouth and nodded, sure that it was plenty. Then, without a second thought, he poured the gasoline over the wood. He crouched low and thought he was about to set it ablaze when suddenly a voice broke the silence. The Cobalts surged out of the cave, fully awake and ready. When they spotted Su Hong, the Cobalts froze in shock at seeing him standing there. Before they could even blink, he was already lunging forward with a fire axe in hand. The axe swung in a wide arc and quickly cut down the Cobalt. As he stared at the downed enemies, idea popped into his head. Maybe being sleepy was a special power, because the blue creatures were so drowsy that he could hit them perfectly. He was shocked that killing him in one turn was still possible. Just as a blue window popped up to announce his level was now 1, and he had earned 4 points. So he took a breath and read the message. There was no time to celebrate, so he pushed the details aside to act fast before more Cobalts woke up, and he dropped his lighter onto the gasoline-soaked firewood. Suddenly, flames burst to life and spread fast, crackling inside the cave while smoke rose, revealing that in the game, every low-tier monster Sura face shared one common trait. They were very fragile and couldn't handle surprises. Even though burning them would have been easier, as the new boss of this place, I knew it would make cleaning up a real mess later. Because of that, he decided to take out his enemies first before striking. The smoke stung their eyes and made their heads spin, giving him the perfect chance to take out the monsters. While inside the cave, the Cobalts screamed and stumbled around in a coughing, roaring mess of confusion. Kang-ho smiled to himself, knowing that chaos was his key to control, while the Cobalt soldiers stumbled out into the open, coughing and falling, right into the trap Kang Sung-ho had been waiting to spring on them. He thought at least 5 would come out since a Cobalt pack usually held 7, but fewer appeared than he expected. He counted fast and found only 3 left, so he moved without a second thought. 1 Cobalt fell dead in a flash, sending green blood splashing across the ground. The last Cobalts roared in anger and charged through the smoke, their eyes wild and movements clumsy, but with a deadly purpose. Kang Sung-ho lifted his axe high and smashed it down with all his strength. The blade sliced through the air and sank into a Cobalt, sending green blood flying just as another one charged from the side, screaming. He dropped low and rolled forward just in time to dodge the claws, only to find himself surrounded by the Cobalt as they all charged in together. In one quick move, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a spray can. He pointed it right at the charging Cobalt's face and squeezed hard, sending a powerful blast straight into its eyes. The creature let out a scream of pain, stumbled backward, and was left blind and confused. Kang-ho quickly used that split second to stand steady, but before the creature could finish its scream, the axe swung down and cut through its body, sending a spray of green blood into the air. Kang-ho squeezed his grip on the pipe and stared forward, knowing there was just 1 Cobalt left. He spoke softly to the trembling Cobalt, letting it know it was the last one left, and as the leader's body shook with fear, he watched him closely with cold eyes. He lifted his weapon and brought it down with one powerful strike, then glanced at the cave and claimed it as his own. He sank to the ground and let out a long sigh, knowing the fight was done even though he felt bone-tired from having no stamina to last. As he rested, he found himself exhausted like a player hit by a game debuff, seeing a blue window reveal that while he was now level 1, his health and all his stats were lowered due to the strange effect of exhaustion that gave him no new points despite leveling up. He knew that leveling up would bring him new conveniences, so even this day's reward felt important, and as he quietly accepted the fresh menus appearing before him, he smiled faintly, knowing he now had a safe, private space all his own. After standing up and turning to face his new home in the cave, he found it a messy mess of broken wood and debris. So he sighed, accepted his situation, and decided he'd have to clean the nest before he could rest. Once Kong Sango found his safe haven, he got straight to work making it clean. Buried 15 meters deep in a cramped, filthy den that smelled awful after their big fight, he groaned in disgust while cleaning the mess. Even so, he kept working the hardest he ever had, cursing the kobolds as he cleaned up their mess and told them to clean after themselves. Now that he had a safe haven in the other world, he opened the dimensional gate and used its power to easily move items, making the cleaning much simpler. But he was so exhausted that he felt like he might collapse at any moment, even sighing to himself while working and wondering how hard his life had become. Even though he was traveling between worlds and found a surprising secret, he kept cleaning without stopping until he realized he could fix the coordinates of both places. Because of that, things could touch and move across both worlds, so when he tested it, water actually flowed through the gate, leaving him shocked and thrilled that it really worked. Once the cleaning was done, he stepped back and took in a room. The hideout looked much better than before, even though he still needed to scrub the bloodstains off the walls and pour fresh concrete on the ground, so he could finally store his things properly. But Kong Sung-ho knew the mortar work would take a few days, and after that, he still had to install the sandwich panels, so while thinking about it, he suddenly paused in confusion. That's when he spotted the glowing and sparking stones tucked into the cave walls, one shining with light and the other sparking fire. Seeing them, he was amazed because these stones were the perfect first items for anyone new to Sayora, and clutching them in his hands, he knew that this place was a complete gold mine. With a grin, he decided to start mining immediately once the construction work was done. The next day came, and standing outside the snack bar, he let out a long groan. Inside, he hunched over and gasped for air, his entire body aching from yesterday's hard push, with every single muscle screaming in pain. As his arm rose, he suddenly stopped and stared at the tiny cuts covering his skin, wondering how he'd ever gotten them. Even so, the trouble wasn't bad enough to require his son, Apple, just yet. He decided to try making an ointment first to see if it would work. Holding the ingredients in his hands, he found a way to mix the guaca powder and vegetable oil in equal parts was actually quite simple. He poured the mix into a bowl, kept stirring until it slowly hardened, and a small smile spread across his face as he worked. The result was a handy kitchen healer that could mend minor cuts, and making it was a breeze. He tested the ointment by rubbing it on his arm, and almost instantly, he felt it working its healing magic. It worked, but when Kong Ho took a closer look and frowned, he realized relying on such a thing was just too much of a hassle. To improve his stats, he had to keep doing what he was doing, but as thoughts of deadly fights flashed through his mind, he quietly worried he might die before the disaster even arrived. So he sat down to think it through because a sling was too small and dependent on the terrain. A gun could only kill 1 or 2 enemies at first, and none of those options felt reliable enough. Then a thought struck him. What he knew about Sayora was just the beginning, not the whole tale. That was just a tale in the background, but would those events truly come to pass in real life? He walked into the room and took a look around. He paused to think, and then realized the information wasn't entirely useless. If those old events really happened the way the story says, they'd help him out so much that he had to find out if they were true. After laying out his plan, Kong Sung-ho climbed to the rooftop as agreed, getting ready for the construction work. Fortunately, the bags of mortar he'd ordered the night before were already stacked up, so the work went smoothly. After that, he headed downstairs to grab the things he had ordered. He was reaching for the pile of packages when someone suddenly shouted his name. Mickey Young greeted him cheerfully in the afternoon, and hearing her voice, Kangen-ho paused and turned to wonder if she had gotten closer or if her address had changed. Mickey Wong told the confused Kong Sanongo that she'd been eating at Toki every day, which is why she kept running into him. Hearing that, Kong Ho laughed nervously, offered an apology, and explained he'd been tied up with store renovations lately. Mikon glanced at him and noted that he seemed surprisingly busy, leaving Kang Zongo puzzled until she smiled and pointed out that he used to get a haircut every 3 months. Kang Sung-ho nodded in agreement, and Miking's face lit up as he suggested getting a haircut right then. Kang Zongo thought it over, realized it wasn't a bad idea since he needed a trim for the upcoming adventure anyway. So with a relaxed smile, he agreed and suggested they do it. After that, the two men headed to Kang's hair salon, where Mkaiwang stood behind him to ask how Kang H-go wanted his hair cut, and the man sitting in the chair with long hair over his shoulders calmly said he wanted it all chopped off. She jumped at the news and asked why, but he said he wanted to shave it all off to start fresh. Hearing those words, Mkaiwang smiled and promised to do her best, then grabbed her spray bottle and scissors to get started. As she sliced through his hair, she suddenly pointed out that his shoulders had gotten wider, and he admitted with a hint of surprise that his recent workouts must be showing. She nodded and mentioned hearing something odd about the status window linking to survival life, which made Kang-ho lean in and listen closely. She kept cutting and explained that Awakeners were just people who had played the game at least once, which made Kang-ho look shocked as he asked if it was really true. He then leaned in and asked her where she'd found out that secret. Mickey Wong paused for a second, looking a bit embarrassed before starting to explain. Right then, a stranger popped up out of nowhere. A blond man stepped in and asked why she was shocked to see him at this hour, saying he was here to share some news, which reminded Kang-ho of the time he once fought with this loud-singing man. As the man kept talking about someone hoarding information and fleeing while deleting every video, Mikun gasped in shock to find out it was actually true. The blonde-haired man told Mikong his group was hunting down where that person lived, but Mikong looked uneasy and asked if that was breaking the law. The blonde man spoke the truth, called out her name, and asked if they could really be picky right now. He claimed that finding and revealing the person hiding secrets was for the greater good, but she still hesitated, saying it didn't feel right, while from his chair Kang Sung-ho felt a bad chill in his chest as he realized they were talking about him and looking for him. The blonde man urged Mickey Wong to be brave and asked if she was ready to join their team, but she hesitated, saying she hadn't decided yet, while Kang Sung-ho sat quietly, finding the whole situation ridiculous. In his mind, he remembered deleting the video simply because he felt disappointed then, never imagining he could control information or even taking the time to think about such a thing. The blonde man clicked his tongue in annoyance, called her frustrating, then put his arm around her shoulder to boast that everything was going exactly like Seora, which made Kang-ho feel sick at the man's arrogant show of knowing everything. The blonde man sneered, saying that if that guy had shared the info sooner, none of this mess would be happening. He warned Mickey Wong they had almost no time left, which made Kang-ho wonder if the whole town would turn on him and curse him, and if so, he wasn't sure what to do about the secret he might have to tell. The blonde man urged her to decide fast, and right then, Kang-ho stepped forward. He spoke quietly, saying he did understand what they were talking about, and asked if they could talk about it later. The blonde man's eyes went wide with shock, and he spun around to tell whoever was there that they didn't know who they were messing with. Kang-ho leaned in with icy eyes, politely telling the blonde man to go before things got ugly again. The blonde man stood still, beads of sweat forming on his face while fear slowly filled his eyes. He made a nervous noise, sighed that today was just going wrong, muttered he was leaving, turned to the door, and gave a stiff goodbye as he walked out. Once he was gone, Mipkyong finally relaxed and let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping as the tension faded. After a pause, Kang Senongo spoke once more, gently asked for a number to stay in touch, and with a soft smile warned her that the blonde man was no good. After that, he headed home, paused his building project for a bit, and fired up his computer. Using the excuse of keeping secrets, the online world suddenly grew huge. Real-time boards were bursting with angry messages as shocked people cursed the man who deleted the videos, with some threatening to hunt him down, others offering rewards to hackers for exposing him, and the screen flooded with insults and abuse. The person who first shared the vital news now faced nothing but hatred. He scrolled down and found one of his old posts about early game honey tips, which explained zombie behavior in safe floors, but even under that helpful guide, people were still attacking him with mockery, doubt, and demands for proof until he finally spotted an ID that belonged to that same group. He clicked the link, saw the name on the screen, frowned, and muttered that the person was crazy, wondering why anyone would verify their real name just to have a silly nickname. He couldn't take it anymore and shut down the computer, feeling a heavy wave of disgust settle in his chest, though he knew it wasn't because he was weak, but simply because he was tired of people like them. But then everything shifted. As he sat there with his hand on the chair, he suddenly felt strange, his mind clearing up until he could reach out and open the dimensional gate. For the next 2 days, he dug up glowing and fire-starting stones with his pickaxe to finish building his hideout. He then mixed mortar with water and poured it right onto the ground. He carefully spread it out and smoothed it flat with a tool until every rough spot was gone. After finishing his work, he stepped out to wait for the mortar to dry, letting the quiet air wrap around him as he took a short break. As he watched the moon rise in the dark sky, his hands slowly curled into fists. He realized that facing wrong with force was his way, for he was just an ordinary person with no grand mission. By the end, he realized there was only one thing that mattered: staying alive. As he turned around to go back after making that choice, a loud snap echoed from behind him. He turned his head slowly and squinted his eyes. Suddenly, a bone creeper emerged from the shadows, its skeleton stepping forward with loud cracking sounds as its glowing red eyes watched him approach. As soon as he saw it, he muttered a curse under his breath. Suddenly, a powerful wave of force swept right through the place. Kong Ho was hurled backward and slammed hard onto the ground. His body spun across the dirt, kicking up a cloud of dust and tiny stones in its wake. He hacked hard and struggled to sit up, his face twisted in pain and shock. He yelled in a panic, totally lost about what had just gone down. The wind died down, leaving him kneeling on the ground with his head in his hands and his ears ringing, only to find broken bones scattered on the floor once the dust finally cleared. Kong Sung-ho stared at his trembling hand in disbelief, wondering how he could still be standing after that. As he recalled the events, a bone creeper appeared in his mind, but by the time he noticed it, the creature was about to burst open. He had no time to think, so he spun around and sprinted with all his strength, but a massive explosion behind him sent a shock wave, flying him through the air until he crashed hard on the ground, barely making it. With his body in pain, he finally saw the truth for what it was. Kong Sung-ho lifted his hand and checked his status window. The screen revealed his health was critically low and all his stats had plummeted, yet his muscles and organs were unharmed. Seeing his level and points rise, he realized the system had already marked the bone creeper as defeated. His head began to throb terribly, so he clutched it while the world spun around him in a dizzy, confused blur. He swiftly flung open the dimensional gate and dashed back to his home. Once he returned, he immediately tended to his wounds, setting his medical supplies on the table and sitting down before them. He pulled the sharp bone pieces out of his skin one by one. His teeth gritted as pain shot through him, so he rushed to smear healing ointment on his wounds to stop the bleeding, wincing as the sharp burn made him gasp. Once the bleeding slowed, he wrapped his arm and body in bandages to check how he was doing. His eyes went blurry and his strength gave out, so Kong Ho finally crumbled onto the couch and drifted off to sleep from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, sunlight filled the room while Kong Sung-ho lay bandaged on the couch, feeling too weak to move and fearing he might actually die. Sitting up, he realized he should have checked if the ointment worked before sleeping, so he quickly opened his status window. His status window revealed that his health had recovered and his body was stable. So Kang Ho finally let out a slow, relieved breath as he realized the medicine had worked. Then he began to wonder what had happened last night and where that bone creeper had come from. But he knew the forest was huge, so it made sense that scary things could pop up at any moment. After the accident, Kong Sang-ho knew his perception stat was too weak, so he had to boost it to spot danger sooner. He recalled how Serora worked. There are only two paths to get stronger. The first path was to fight your way through enemies, level up, and earn new skills to grow stronger. He knew he could find special items with stats, but he also knew Serora was a mean game. He remembered how players kept fighting monsters over and over again, just dreaming that the random drops would finally give them something useful. He also remembered that powerful monsters might have special skills, and if the right conditions were met, he could learn them too. He desperately wanted items that improved his stats, but he had no clue where to find them right now. Kong Ho looked back at the game's past to find his answer. He flipped on his device, opened the game menu, and read how the Silver Rain began, recalling that lucky folks could grab special items before the world ended. But this only happens if those strange early signs occur in our real world, bringing out powerful monsters during that time. After spending a long time reading the story's history, he finally learned that 3 things happened before the real disaster, with the last being a Russian ship, and the one before that being a mysterious thing called the Hobgoblin, about which no clear details existed. He saw a report on the screen saying that on June 26th at 5 p.m., an orc's body was found near Jungan campground on Jirisan Mountain, but the news was quickly deleted by the government, so almost no one knew about it, and Kong Ho realized this was the very first event. He glanced at the clock, figured the orc must have been alive earlier that day if it was found on the 26th, and decided to head out that night to get there by morning. Just as he got ready to start, his phone suddenly rang. Kong Ho stared at the screen, puzzled by why Mikon was calling him so late. The scene moved to a cafe called Starbin where Mikyong was already waiting and looked worried when she saw him, asking if he was okay. She pointed out how odd his face looked and how strange it was to see him in long sleeves on such a hot day. But Kong Sanong-ho chuckled softly and said he just didn't feel the heat much. Mikon watched him closely, wondering if something had happened before, and asked if it was because his haircut got delayed because of Owen Hook last time, to which Kong-ho quickly said no. Hearing that, Mickey Ewing felt her shoulders drop, admitting she was actually a bit spooked by how he had looked before. Kong Sung-ho chuckled softly and admitted that, despite his joke, he truly disliked that man. He explained that the man used to cause trouble with his illegal tow truck and even fought a weak old man, proving he had a terrible character. Kaiwang was stunned and admitted she never knew he was such a person, but Kong Sung-ho explained that made sense because that man always caused trouble late at night or early in the morning. Kong Sung-ho asked why she had called him today, and Mickey Wong hesitated before nervously saying she needed to talk about something important. She leaned in and whispered that she was an awakener, leaving Kong-ho stunned and wondering why she'd tell him something so strange. Kong-ho decided to go along with Mickey Yong for now, smiling and joking that he was jealous because he hadn't awakened yet. Mickey Yong rushed to apologize for lying and feeling terrible about it, but Kong Sung-ho reassured her that he didn't get it wrong and knew she wouldn't do such a thing. He thanked her for sharing news and chatting, leaned in, and said that thanks to her, he felt a bit better. He admitted the house renovation had made him stressed, but he was still happy he'd come see her. Before he left, he promised he'd see her again in the real world and said he was finally ready to take the game much more seriously. After returning home, he settled on his bed, felt better, and gazed at his phone, wondering what good people he could meet next. He rented a high-tech drone to peek into the forest and a car to get him through the rest of the trip. After that, he chose to rest so his body could heal and be ready for its best performance. The next morning, the moment the sun peeked over the horizon, Kong-ho began gathering everything he needed to hunt the orcs. Deep inside the cave, he sat down at his workbench and began smashing the ignition stones, knowing he had to be extra careful because the job was dangerous. He knew that hitting it wrong might set it ablaze, so when he struck it and sparks flew into a small fire, he was shocked but kept right on working. Next, he grabbed the glowing stones, which burned so brightly in his hand that the flashing light made his eyes water. Yet he kept them there because the results were worth the pain. Once the basic prep for the orc hunt was done, he set jars and materials on the table, then began mixing colorful powders and liquids in various containers. Then he poured in another liquid that turned everything into a solid block, slowly bringing together exactly what he needed for the hunt. After setting up a desk at the fixed coordinates of the dimensional gates, he stepped back into our world. He packed everything into the car, then stood there, raising his hand and looking around in total surprise. He softly inspected his supplies with a satisfied smile, glad he'd rented such a good car. He looked around and felt that everything he needed was already there, waiting for him. Kong-ho sat in the driver's seat and smiled, ready to finally get moving. He walked straight for Jerisin, the spot where the orc was about to show up. Just before midnight, the car pulled into the Yong's and recamping ground parking lot right as heavy rain poured down and soaked everything. With only a little time left, he practiced his moves in the game against an orc while sitting in the car, watching his progress on his phone screen. After that, he reached into his car to double-check that all his gear was ready. As the next morning broke, he stepped out into the rain wearing a hooded coat and a flashlight strapped to his head. He started looking really hard, but the rain got heavier and louder, and he grumbled as the bad weather stuck with him. Then, thick fog rolled in to cover everything, leaving him unable to see the path ahead. As he stepped carefully through the wet ground, he kept wondering just where the orc would show up. He was certain he had already walked the whole campsite, and he couldn't shake the memory of everyone staring at the creature lying on the ground. Just like he feared, odd signs started showing up in the real world, and as he lifted his hand with a sinking feeling, he knew something big was about to happen. Before he could finish speaking, a sudden loud noise rang out, a sharp warning echoing through the rain, and he froze instantly. When he heard the sound, his eyes went wide with shock. Through the heavy rain and mist, a huge shadow slowly emerged with glowing red eyes, and he instantly knew it was an orc. It wasn't just any orc, but a rare red one that made his heart pound with the thrill of a possible skill drop. He breathed deep, told himself to stay calm, and squeezed the red flare stick until flames erupted, lighting up the rain. He moved forward with a steady look, convinced that sticking to the plan was all it took to catch it. As the red orc stepped through the fog with his weapon raised, the fight had started and the plan for facing him was already set in motion. First, he used the orc's anger to make it focus on him. With a quick flick of his wrist, he hurled the flare, sending a spinning burst of red light that hit the ground just as the orc noticed it. Pulling toward the glowing flare, it spun its body to face the bright light. Rain poured down as the angry orc stepped closer with a tight grip on his weapon. Glowing red eyes locked on his target just before he struck. For a split second, the orc halted its charge, eyes locked tight on the flare burning on the ground. That was the chance Shangho had been hoping for. So he sprinted forward, reached out his hand, and yelled to Tyr, open his portal. Then he slipped between the orc's legs just as a bright blue portal opened on the wet ground right in front of him. As he slid toward the portal, he pulled out a flashbang that was already burning before stepping through. Before the orc could move, a flashbang went off right in its face, blasting blue light that tore through the rain and left the orc blinded. As the orc roared in pain from the blinding flash that stole its sight, Su Hong knew he had exactly 20 seconds before the giant's vision returned. He pulled out his knife and lit another flash can, and from that second on, they were fighting against the clock as sparks flew and the flame burned on. He stepped forward with no second thought, aiming to tear the orc's muscles apart as the beast stumbled, its body shaking and unsteady. The curse on its muscles made the orc sluggish, so he struck back instantly, slashing with a blade that glowed green and tore deep into its flesh. The orc let out a painful scream, its red raging eyes wide as blood sprayed into the rain, blinding and hurting it. The orc swung its weapon wildly, sending a red arc of fire through the air as it attacked in a blind fury. Su Hongho dropped low just in time to dodge the strike, his eyes steady and his grip on the knife firm. In the next heartbeat, he lunged ahead, slashing his blade into the orc's leg in a flash of blue light that sent green energy exploding from the wound. The orc let out a scream of pain, opening its mouth wide to roar in agony. Its body stumbled as it lost its balance, its hurt leg giving way and forcing it down to one knee. While heavy rain made it hard for the orc to stand, Su Hong kept moving forward until he was right in front of him. Then he pulled out his burning flame can and slammed it down. He lunged forward without thinking, shoved a burning can deep into the orc's open mouth, and watched its sharp teeth snap shut on the fire. In a split second, a huge boom blew the orc's head apart, sending fire flying everywhere, while Su Hong stepped back into the pouring rain as the blast shook the orc's body. He stared at the burning ruins and calmly asked how it felt, noting that even an orc couldn't survive such a fate. Suddenly, a hard punch slammed right into his side. The hit sent him tumbling across the ground where he rolled and crashed hard, coughing and struggling to breathe. He lay in the rain with a sore body, sweat dripping down his face as he gritted his teeth and cursed himself for making the stupid mistake of letting his guard down. The orc stood tall, wrapped in raging fire that climbed its muscles while smoke drifted up into the rainy air, and though the blast had hit it, it slowly stepped forward as Songo cursed under his breath. Rain mixed with sweat running down his face as his eyes widened in sudden fear, and for a split second, he wondered if he was really about to die right here. Before anything else could happen, another sound rang out. As the orc fell and vanished in a violent burst of flames, blue system windows floated into the air to show that Su Hong had leveled up to 3, earned 10 points, and gained a new skill survival instinct, leaving him to stare silently at the glowing screens with weak hands. After a pause, he sighed and admitted he simply couldn't keep going with this anymore. The fire kept crackling by his side while the rain came down, so he slowly stood up and looked around, trying to find where he'd dropped his thing. Just then, a blue window popped up as a watch materialized on his arm, boosting his perception by 2 and bringing him such relief that the heavy rain didn't matter since the watch had just appeared all by itself. He then looked down at the orc's remains and wondered what he should do with the body. He knew the Mount Jerry orc incident was strictly off-limits, and felt uneasy about sharing what he had learned. His face grew serious as he remembered Miss Simpkin's warning that anyone who had ever played that game was considered awakened. If that were true, then thousands must have already woken up, and the idea of them surrounding him made his chest feel heavy. He worried that even a tiny group of people who thought the system was a trap for personal gain would destroy it and start riots. But Su Hongho knew the real danger was that leaving this corpse behind would let it turn into a bone-eating monster and hurt everyone by tomorrow. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks, an idea hitting him hard, wondering why he'd never thought that he could turn into a zombie himself. He figured that even if he woke up, the spores could still turn him into a zombie. The rain kept falling as he curled up on the ground, feeling completely overwhelmed, and admitted he just couldn't make a choice right then. But he knew one thing for sure, so he held up his hand and screamed for the doorway to swing wide open. A blue portal opened in the rain, and knowing the world needed an orderly end to save a few, he dragged the orc's body into the other world. He let out a frustrated sigh and then drove the shovel hard into the dirt. Fuming with anger, he grabbed the shovel to dig the grave, while grumbling about how wretched his life had become and how he was forced to bury the body himself. all the while his body shuddered from the crushing exhaustion and pain. He cried out that if his body weren't so broken, he wouldn't have to live in such misery. Just as a system alert flashed, exhaustion triggered his survival instinct, boosting his will, stamina, health, and sight with a burst of golden light that made him shout in rage, grip his shovel tight, and decide to end the fight instantly without any more hesitation. He had no choice but to sprint for his life, because what looked like a broken, overpowered survival instinct was the only thing keeping him from dying. But once the magic faded, his body needed time to heal before he could move again. He raced through the trees, clinging to his life, and finally swung open the doorway back home. Outside, dawn was just breaking, so he hopped in his car, raced home with his survival instincts screaming at him to keep moving. As dawn broke over the quiet street, Su-hong's shop stood calm and untouched by the chaos around it. Standing inside, he gazed up at the darkening sky and murmured in surprise, wondering if the time had finally come. He glanced at his phone, checked the schedule, and realized he was supposed to have built his defensive line by now. He looked at his phone again, hoping the Red Orc's trail had vanished, only to read a news story about wild weather at Mount Jerry with rain pouring from dawn until morning. He put the phone down, sighed that today felt like a bad time for anything, then opened the door and walked into the room, wondering if he should check on the community and see what supplies had arrived that morning. He snatched the wooden box, pried it open, and let out a sudden, shocked cry. Inside lay weapons and tools arranged with care, and the moment he saw them, his face changed instantly. He grinned, declared that it was the moment, grabbed the Indian war club, and realized that while this was his only weapon right here, out there in the other world, he could wield anything without limits. But when he looked at the box again, he frowned because it felt like something was missing. He picked up the note from the box and saw that his order for a spear had been stopped by customs. But he wasn't surprised because he knew that even buying from a legal seller doesn't guarantee that weapons will get through. Suddenly, the doorbell rang while he wondered if it was another delivery. So he quickly told the driver to just leave it at the front, but then the bell rang again, making him frown as he wondered if the driver hadn't heard him. He stood up, walked to the door, and reached for the knob. Just as he opened the door, he froze and his eyes went wide with shock, letting out a confused noise. He couldn't help but wonder why Miss Maki Yang was there, standing before him looking so nervous, apologizing softly for not seeing each other in so long, and telling him she really needed to have a talk. She paused, clutching the bag tightly, then spoke once more to ask if he was all right with it. She lifted the bag a little, blushed, and asked if he wanted to grab some ribaki with her. Miss Mickey Wong stood in Sango's house, smiling softly as she set a steaming meal down in front of him. Sun-ho stared at her, surprised to realize Miss Mickey Wong was actually in his house right now. It sounded silly, but he just couldn't stop thinking about it. Miss Mickey Wong urged him to eat faster, and Sango, as always, replied that he was eating while asking what she wanted to talk about. Miss Mickey Wong paused before saying that he had asked to check on Seoul, so she wanted to share what she knew. And hearing this, Sango felt tears welling up because he knew his love story was coming to an end. Even though he felt nervous, he knew it was the right thing to tell Miss Mickey Wong what he knew. As he stared at Miss Mekong's face, he knew that kind people were the only hope left in this ruined world. After finishing his meal, Miss Mekong told Su-hong she'd quickly toss out the trash and return, so he nodded and said he'd get ready while waiting. While she was gone, Su-hong pulled out his laptop to gather community information and help secretly, all while hiding the truth that he had been awakened. He started by telling the tale of the metal death plague. He warned that moving in groups bigger than 6 made it much easier for zombies and monsters to spot them. He also told us that being able to see the world around us was the most important skill for staying alive. Miss Mekong scribbled down her notes, confirming that tall buildings were safe only up to the 8th floor and that sharp senses were key, so Sun-ho nodded that since they had to survive the game, perception had to be their most important skill. Sun-ho kept digging through the internet, looking for answers. Suddenly, Miss Mekong dropped a bombshell. Kimba Plover was getting slammed by everyone lately. She puzzled over why he held back the truth, and Sun-ho simply shrugged, admitting that without ever playing the game himself, he didn't really know what was going on. He then asked if she had any guesses, and Miss Mickey Wong paused before saying that everyone had their own reasons. Then, with a calm smile, the woman casually told Owen Hawk that she had turned down his invitation to join his group. Sun-ho asked why, and she told him she had met his friends, didn't like what she saw, and then gave him her phone so he could watch the video she had recorded. On the recording, Owen Hawk's group whispered about kidnapping Miss Mekine if she kept playing hard to get, but another voice told them to wait since she'd come soon anyway, even as someone cursed their leader for being a trash bastard. When Su-hong heard the recording, he flew into a rage and shouted that they were bastards. With a grim expression, he warned Miss Mkayun that if disaster struck and the law crumbled, people would show their true natures, so she should not trust anyone. Instead of stepping back, She turned the question around to ask him what made him trustable. Then, without a second thought, she put her offer to Su Hong's on the table, asking him to join her and form a party. Caught by surprise at her sudden offer, he stood frozen in silence while Su Hong weighed her next move. He had to hit level 10 and open the shop before the tutorial was over. But this created a big trouble because in the original game, the monster's strength changed based on how strong the player got. It was obvious that if she followed Su Hong as he grew stronger, the monsters would get dangerous too, turning her attempts to lighten the mood into a deadly trap. So when Su Hong joked about becoming a zombie and asked what would happen, Mickey Wong laughed and said it would still be fine. Right after she spoke, she tapped in her new power, vanished from her spot, and suddenly materialized right behind Su Hong. She turned to tell him her special trait was blinking, so she just had to dodge right before he bit her. Su Hong was stunned that he had warned her against sharing such secrets so casually, but Mickey Wong answered honestly, saying she had only shown them because it was him, making it her way of showing trust. She smiled warmly and offered hope that if they both made it without turning into zombies, they could team up to survive. Even if they couldn't join forces as a team, she still hoped they would work together. Once she was gone, Su Hong stepped back into his private realm and quietly set about strengthening his defenses by gathering and inspecting the materials he had prepared in the forest. After planning everything out, he got to work, one step at a time, setting up support posts and driving them firmly into the ground. He tightly wrapped barbed wire around them and made sure everything was held fast. After setting up his infrared sensors to guard the area, he stepped back to admire his new defensive line and wished that all his hard work might finally earn him a single point of dexterity. With the barrier built and the mortar laid, he scanned the area, ready to move the rest of the supplies. Soon after, he stepped into his cave-like hideout, which was packed with boxes and supplies, and he nodded to himself, happy that he had gathered everything he needed for now. Next, he imagined slicing the space with sandwich panels to finish the rooms inside. As he thought about what to do next, a sudden cold shiver hit him, making him sneeze and shake, realizing this strange new world felt as chilly as a late autumn day. If he was going to sleep here, he knew he had to get ready to keep the cold out, so he looked at a portable heater and started planning how to make the room warm. At the same time, he decided he should build a real door for the entrance instead of just using a simple blackout curtain. He scribbled the task in his notebook, then stood there laughing at how his list of things to do just kept growing. After grabbing some supplies from a nearby woodworking shop, he hurried back through the quiet streets, double-checking his list to find the right places to grab things before the deadly metal plague hit in 5 hours. First he went to the hardware store, then the pharmacy, and next the motorcycle shop, muttering to himself as he checked his list, until suddenly a familiar voice called out his name. He looked up and saw a big man with a friendly grin waving nearby, who Song knew was Hung Junhong. This man was Oh Hung Jun, the protein monster, who ran the gym while raising his young daughter after his divorce. Seeing Hung Jun's worried look, Su Hong asked if he was okay, and when Hung Jun admitted he was tired, he casually asked if Su Hong had started working out again. Hung Jun stared at his own body, convinced that the muscle memory he had carved into Su Hong was finally returning, only for Su Hong to laugh and admit she'd been using her body just a little lately because of her own remodeling. After a quick laugh, Hong pressed for the truth, causing Hyong Wan's face to fall as he whispered that the world felt like it was ending. Hearing that, he paused for a moment and asked Hyong Jun if he'd heard those rumors too, only for Hyong Jun to explain that one of his gym members had seen statues move and zombies appear. He asked Sun if he truly believed it, explaining that he didn't at first until his friend told him to watch closely and suddenly began floating in the air, which made Sun fall silent and then act surprised, admitting it was real. Hung Jun confessed he'd seen it with his own eyes and said it looked like a superpower, but when Su Hong told him he hadn't awakened any powers himself, Hung Jun just agreed. As Hung Jun mentioned someone with powers heading to the broadcast tower to cash in on the chaos, Su Hong couldn't fathom why anyone would think about money during such a dangerous time. Hung Jun pulled up a chair for Surum and explained that the powerful man had a meeting with the TV station's boss, so he couldn't have known otherwise.